As an international cricket journalist for 10 years, I tell you what, I have got a collection of international SIM cards that I will never truly understand. Now I find there is a company called Sally who gives you an eSIM and it makes it all so much easier. So if you're planning on making any trips, download your Sally eSIM app and you can also get a 15% discount if you say good areas, all one word, at checkout. Travel like a pro with your Sally eSIM today. Welcome to Wagon Wheel, everyone, the cricket podcast that talks or answers, it talks and answers, discusses your questions on the sport. I'm Jarrod Kimber. Big thanks to everyone who supports us on the lives. Apologies for all the Wi-Fi issues. New studio, obviously, we're working our way through. We've got another new system today, so hopefully that one works better than some of the others. If you listen on the audio, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. It comes through fine, but on the live video, we have most of our issues at the moment. So apologies for that, but we are working it out step by step. It might take a little while, but we're on our way there. If you want to ask a question on YouTube, the best way is via a super chat. And if not, you can get in early, like Jane Doe has, by going to patreon.com/Good Areas Podcasts. And then you can ask a question like, thoughts on Brooks dropping out of the IPL? Rumors are he's done this because he might be England's next white ball captain, but for whatever reason, his white ball form has been terrible. Doesn't it make more sense to hone your skills in the IPL? I don't want to rumors it, Jane, only because we know that he's pulled out for other reasons before. I've said this quite a bit, that the whole IPL banning system is a bit weird because, like, it's up. My experience of this is that teams aren't particularly good at just discussing with the players how much they want to play beforehand or whether they're 100% committed or anything else. And so you have to put some of this on the owners at a certain point. But yeah, from a development point of view, I put up a short video, Jam, on Instagram and the other short video areas. And in it, I was basically saying, if you're an England fan, like, you might be like, oh, great, well, I don't want him in the IPL and everything else. But from a development point of view, he has some issues playing spin. He specifically cannot play wrong-uns very well. The most highly concentrated wrong-uns you'll ever face, probably in any level of cricket now, is probably going to be in the IPL. All the best wrong-uns are there, right? So from a development point of view, it does hold him back. But, you know, I would assume he's got a good reason not to be there, whether it's injury, whether it's mental health, whether it's, as you say, like, whatever it may be. He's made his decision and he has to deal with it. Neil says, I'm probably late to the party, but it's been great to see TalkSport's coverage of cricket over the last couple of years. Long may it continue. We kind of really came back in 2018. I would say that's the first time they've done it properly as well. As a consumer, my broader question is, does radio-based sports broadcast media as a business model make money? I assume TMS benefits from the BBC's license fee, but curious to understand what makes radio platforms commercially viable. So I have a bit of experience with this because podcasts are commercially viable. And one of the reasons that podcasts are commercially viable is the same reason that radio works, which is with TV, you watch, and when the ads come on, you get up and you go to the toilet. When the ads come on, you talk to each other. You change channels quite a lot on TV. People who listen to radio generally listen to radio throughout the day and for long periods of time. You know, and it's not, you know, maybe you're driving, maybe you're, you know, on a train or wherever it may be, on a bus, walking around. Those people who listen to it are massive, right? And generally, especially with something like TalkSport, it's a little bit different with music stations because you might have 2 or 3 music stations you like, and so you will flick between them looking for your favorite song. There isn't really another TalkSport, right? I know BBC talks about sport and they have channels to talk about sport, but it's not TalkSport. So I can't remember what TalkSport's numbers are, but it's like, let's say it's 4 or 5 million listeners, or, you know, those 4 or 5 million listeners, of those, there's probably anywhere between 500,000 and 1 million who just listen consistently, especially those who drive around all day. That is what they listen to. So it makes a lot of money because radio advertising actually pays quite healthily. Cricket specifically is actually one of the best things a sports radio station could have. I don't really know the full reasons behind BBC going for the rights, because there's a commercial company who would want the rights, and I don't understand why the BBC pays, and they pay a lot of money for the rights. I don't really understand how that works. But from a commercial standpoint, if you're listening to TalkSport, and remember, a lot of the cricket is on TalkSport's second channel, which isn't generally going to get a massive amount of listens. TalkSport 2. Got the mug here, actually. If you're going to be doing that, you're dragging a whole new audience to a station for 7 or 8 hours. And if you look at the YouTube model of TalkSport, and I would assume most companies around the world will probably work this out now, you can also get the same people to watch people commentate. Like, we've had games where we've had like 120,000 people watching us commentate, right? Like, it's massive numbers around the world. So what you have is something that, and it's very similar to the Cricinfo business model as well. One of the reasons Cricinfo is still worth more than CricBuzz, even though CricBuzz has more numbers, is that the scoreboards are so much better, or the live scoring information is so much better. You know, the quality, if you got Sid Monga writing a ball by ball description, like, good luck to CricBuzz. They don't even have a Sid Monga, let alone someone like that doing that. And, you know, there's some talented people working for them, but not really doing that. So when people go to Cricinfo, the average time on that website is so much higher than almost any other website of a comparable size, right? And that's the same with cricket on the radio. So you've now got radio advertising pays decent rates. People listen to it for hours on end, and you have a thing that drags them in even more. It's actually a really good model. I've tried to make a business out of it, because I actually think, the future of cricket radio is not probably radio stations. I think it is essentially, it wouldn't cost that much to buy up all the cricket radio rights in the world. I don't know, $10 million a year. It's probably a lot less than that, but let's say it costs $10 million a year. Then you just get a bunch of commentators, and you essentially have rights to everything, and you have one app called 99.94, which was what we were trying to do there. And everyone who wants to listen to cricket anywhere in the world can listen to it. And then off the back of that, you have podcasts, you have written words and everything else, but you have a hub. Test Match Sofa tried to sell this idea to Cricinfo years ago. How much bigger would Cricinfo be if they had that as well? Adityan says, I'm trying to be a poor man's Benny Howe, aren't we all? I'm a medium pacer with an off break, carrom ball, googly, and knuckleball. What should I do to really piss batters off in terms of game plan and field placements? You essentially, one of the big things with Benny Howe is it's not just all the different deliveries. He bowls really, really straight. So he's trying to hit the stumps almost every single delivery in the way of a left arm finger spinner, right? He's trying to hit the stumps every single delivery. And then he's having his field set out. So he has his long on, his long off. He'll have like a straight deep mid wicket quite a bit. And then probably another fielder in front on the leg side, right? And then, you know, deep point perhaps as well. But he's having his fielders as straight as possible. And what he's saying and what he's doing is, if he's deceiving them one after the other, eventually, even if they're trying to knock singles, there's a chance that they will miss them. And that they have to be able to, without much pace being on the ball, hit him back over his head. And you can't use your feet in the same way that you do to spin. And, you know, there are all these different things. But by keeping the stumps in play every time, every single deception then has a chance of getting them out. I think that's sort of an underappreciated part of Benny Howe's skill. And there's been lots of bowlers who've done that sort of stuff. I remember, you know, when I was working with Brad Hodge, he just said to KS Ahmed, he said, I don't care what you bowl, but make sure every ball hits the stumps. And if you can make sure every ball hits the stumps, it means that every decision that a batter makes is from a position. If they make a mistake, they could be out. Ruja says, how much did the ODI game change between 2013 and 2015? England went from being a Champions Trophy finalist to terrible, and India, who won the 2013, were definitely accused of being too conservative by 2015, despite a semi-final run that was a bit of a surprise. New Zealand also seemed to change a ton in that time. Yeah, I mean, New Zealand made the big change. You then had, I suppose, sort of guys like Warner and Guptill and McCullum at the top, Finch at the top. So there was a bit of a change, but the middle was still more or less the same. But I think England's 2013, and I'd have to go back and remember, but my memory of that was that it was very English conditions. And so England was very well suited to play cricket like that. But my memory is that England were not a terrible ODI side in England all the time because the conditions favored them. Their problem was the minute they went out, their form of cricket didn't work anymore. So I think that would be a part of it. But yes, I mean, India was still playing in 2019 with a similar style. They just slightly upped it towards the end of the innings. And so 2015 and 2019 are probably World Cups that I wrote a piece in 2015 that is wrong. But my thinking was right, which was we actually have the ability now to score 500 runs in an ODI game, which hasn't quite happened yet. But the team I picked was India because my theory was that once Kohli and Rohit got in, they both had the ability to score double hundreds in ODI games and go completely nuts at the end. And then you just have slugging around them, right? Now, Kohli probably never quite got to that level, whereas Rohit did. And that was my thinking behind how many runs you could score in an ODI game back then. But if you look at the way that India was playing, it would be very hard for that to happen because they were always playing for the guy at the other end or for the situation, and so they wouldn't do that. Whereas the other teams, through McCullum, through Warner, through Guptill, Finch, South Africa's a little bit different because South Africa's was more David Miller, AB de Villiers, but they all had guys who would just put the foot down, right? And if you look back at ODI cricket, we really hadn't had that many players. Like, there's a reason why Afridi, Sehwag, Klusner, those sorts of players keep popping up when we do our advanced metrics, right? People get really angry about Afridi. Or like, oh, how can you say he's a good player? And I was like, he was striking at like 35 to 40 quicker than other people in his generation. Him averaging 28 or 30 had such a big impact if he got to 28 or 30 in that game, in a way that no one else had that kind of an impact. Whereas by the time you get to 2013, 2015, I think you have a few players who can put their foot down. Maxwell's probably another one there as well, like if you think of that Australian team. But the bigger change is 2015 to 19 because the biggest part of the game is the middle overs. And that was the thing that England changed. Ian says, given that he has the lowest average, 28.3, of any Bangladeshi to take 30 test wickets, how good do you think Hasan Mahmud could be? I'm a very big fan of Hasan Mahmud. He's not the most exciting player because, and I've talked about this before. I think I talked about this a few years ago when, oh my God, who was the guy who bowled at 90 miles an hour in the IPL for a couple of years? Everyone got really excited over him. And it's like, yeah, but he doesn't really do anything else. And since then, his career sort of, I don't know if plateaued is the right thing. One of the things I really like about Hasan Mahmud is he's got 30 wickets in 9 test matches at 28, but he also has 22 wickets in T20s at 23, and he's a consistent wicket taker. I think ODI cricket, he falls back a little bit, but he's pretty much a consistent wicket taker right across the board so far, and I think that to me is a far more interesting skill, a far more interesting than someone who can just do something in one format or another. And if you look at where he's bowled at the moment, I'm just looking at his record now, the vast majority of his wickets, so 23 out of the 30, are in Asia. Finding a fast bowler who can take wickets in Asia, who can then translate to outside of Asia in multiple formats for a team like Bangladesh is what they've been searching for forever. So I think he's got a very high ceiling. He's 25. He's still learning the game, but he seems quite skillful and quite smart to me as well. William says, why does the ICC seemingly not care, or not do anything at least, about the succession of ICC tournaments with half-empty stadiums? It's not that the ICC doesn't care. Cricket tourism doesn't exist in the same way that football tourism works, and some other sports as well. Rugby tourism is another perfect example. So there is an element of that causes the issue. So who travels? English fans travel, Indian fans travel. There really isn't, there's a little bit of Pakistan. There really isn't that many other fans if you're watching a cricket game around the world, Sri Lankan fans don't travel to games. Australian fans, you get little patches, right? The Fanatics and Lukey Sparrows group and everything, but it's very small numbers. You're not going to fill up a stadium with them, right? European football fans are used to traveling for their teams. So when Europe plays, that's a big deal. And that has sort of bled in to other cultures. Up until what? The Barmy Army. Did cricket fans travel at all? Right? It wasn't really a thing within cricket. So you now have two cricket cultures who do it, India and England. How do you change that? Now, let's imagine the ICC was actually a proper organization. Perhaps they could make it a bigger thing. They could make sure that some of the fixtures are released earlier. I mean, we do release fixtures really late for what is international travel. And the biggest complaint that anyone who travels for cricket, that will be their complaint 80% of the time. And the other 20% of the time is that they get charged more than local fans. Those are the two biggest problems with people who travel all the time. So there's definitely an element of those things there. But the ICC, again, it's not, the vast majority of their money is coming from streaming rights and TV rights. So it maybe doesn't matter as much to them. And we're all used to watching cricket grounds that is half full. Whereas I think if that was football or when you see it in the Olympics or something, you do feel a little bit weirded out by it. I think in cricket, we're a little bit more accepting of it. But yes, the ICC should change things. I'm not sure it's in their top, but they're not really in charge of anything. And it probably wouldn't be in the top 20 things I'd want them to change, if we're being honest. I've got a list, if they ever want it. Anyway, we'll take a break here on the Wagon Wheel. We'll be back in a second with more of your questions. Cricket media used to be pretty simple. Find your favorite newspaper, head to Cricinfo, and maybe a blog you like. Now just finding the best stories and writing is a huge challenge. You already have a job. You just want to read about cricket. Well, that is what the best of cricket is currently doing. They go out daily to find the newest cricket coverage and the best stories from any publication in the world. And when they can't discover what they want, they also hire some of the best writers to produce their own great stories. You can get the best of cricket via their website or on WhatsApp. They find cricket's best stories and give them to you every day. All right, welcome back to the Wagon Wheel. And we have Rob, who says, regardless of the suspicious behavior in the BPL, the players don't know the target score at the end of each over beforehand, do they? So how would players coordinate with bookies to manipulate score on the field? So the way that it works is messages are passed through and they do kind of know the totals. So I'm trying to think of a perfect example of this. So if it's at the end of a bracket, you will know roughly what you were supposed to be allowing. And then the bookies will try and get a more direct message to people with the exact numbers. So yes, they do know in some cases, but in some cases it is done beforehand as well. I'm trying to think of a really obvious one. A power play, and it's a slow scoring ground, but you need 57 runs or above in that power play. Then they will play out the first 3 overs as they go and see what happens. And then that's when you start to see the weird stuff happen, right? Of part-time bowlers coming on, the field not making sense. You might get 5 wides, all those sorts of things start to happen. So messages are spread, but in a power play, you wouldn't get that. 10 over ones, and I'm just assuming on 10 over ones, it's probably a bit more, they would have a rough idea of what they need the score to be above for a 10 over period. And I could be wrong with this, but because the only way we know this, Rob, is to understand, but I would assume that they would have a rough idea. So yes, there is a lot of communication. That's why cricketers, you see like NBA players on the bench with phones when they're injured, right? You do not see that in cricket. Person says, given that there are franchise owners who own teams in multiple leagues, has there ever been a situation of retaliation for signing for one team in one league and then not signing for them in another? Or the opposite, do players get deals or perks signing for a team across multiple leagues? Remember that players aren't really, at the moment, the way that these leagues work, players don't really have proper freedom of movement. So if it was more of a free agency style system, I think you would get that. But at the moment, it's auctions and drafts are the vast majority of how those things go. Generally, most players would sign even on a slightly lower contract with the same ownership group because it would help their IPL chances, but also more importantly than that, it does give them access to the coaches all the time, you know, the analysts, physios, the masseuses, all the people that they're used to. So actually, it happens quite naturally. But yeah, I don't know of any retaliation at the moment. For if proper free agency comes in, that is probably a little bit different. Manon says, what are some of the best training techniques to get your hands used to the hardness of a cricket ball? That's a very good question, actually. What I do is probably what I was taught in Australia, which is probably sociopathic, like it's probably nuts. But I literally will just start placing the ball in each hand, and then by the end, I'm throwing it as hard as I can into my hands. And then it's a bit like long toss, I suppose, in with throwing. So if you're throwing, you start by just tossing them softly, then you run back 5 meters, then you toss it a little, and you just keep doing that until you get back to a proper throw, right? So you've slowly warmed it up. And I will do the same with catching. I will just like say, tap me one, then I'll stand back a couple of meters, and I'll be like, hit it quite hard, then I'll go back, and I just do it that way. I don't know of any other ways of doing it. There might be more professional cricketers that know, but that's how I've always done it anyway. And I hate not doing that. Either of those two things I talked about, the slamming the ball into my hand or anything. If I don't do that, I feel really awkward about fielding my first ball. Sam says, red ink are good areas, wagon wheel. What process goes into generating the inspired channel names? And why does cricket break from the convention? So Red Inca was the original name that we came up with. Red Inca was, I wanted something that explained what the podcast was subliminally, I suppose. So we all know what Red Inca is from a cricket perspective, but obviously if you've worked in writing, Red Inca is also there. So I wanted it to be a writing and a cricket story at once. And, you know, I run it past my wife, who's pretty good with that. My wife's named like a couple of my books, like Overthrown Cricket Empire is her name. Australian Autopsy is another of hers. So she's really good at that sort of stuff, much better. You know, English people just understand headlines and puns better than the rest of society. I'm very convinced of that. That trained in this. I don't know what she studied at Cambridge, but I think it was this. So yeah, so I wanted that name. Wagon Wheel, again, kind of came from, I mean, if you look at this podcast, the whole idea of this podcast was that it would be I don't know what you're going to ask me. You know, we have questions that are really simple, right? Like, look at Manan's last question. Like, that's just a club cricketer asking a question. And then sometimes I'll be asked like scientific questions or political questions or whatever. And so if you look at a wagon wheel, the ball can go anywhere. So that was the idea of wagon wheel. And good areas, when we came up with the network, we'd been using the name Good Areas for the videos for a little while, the sort of more produced videos. And I really like that phrase, and I've always liked that phrase. But what I really wanted was a cricket phrase that you had to know a lot about cricket about to really understand. But also, I don't eventually, like, this network may only ever end up being cricket, but it was never my intention to make it only cricket, right? Like, I still want to be able to do other things eventually. And if we make this into a proper business, have spin-offs of that. And I wanted something that just sounded cool. And I love the name Good Areas, but also there's no reason why it can't be, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something random. The Red Bull Formula One on Good Areas. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not very good. I haven't really nailed that, but like, whatever the latest Netflix show is, that the name of that on Good Areas, right? I really always wanted that sort of ring to it. So that's where Good Areas came from. The reason that Crick Picks is different is just because we kind of knew that was a good name, and that it also told you exactly what the show was. I'm sure we could have come up with a slightly more convoluted one, but that was, if you look at it, like Red Inca is just writers and players and people within the game talking about the game. Wagon Wheel is just me answering questions. Good Areas is more a network-wide thing. CricPix is kind of very different. I don't think anyone had really done drafting in cricket before, right? Like it's a very American podcasting sort of culture. And so we wanted it to be really clear to people who weren't quite sure what it was. So yeah, I can't remember if it was me or Bayram or both of us who came up. I think it might have been me, and then if I remember correctly, but that was the name I always had for it. But yeah, and the reason they all have different names, right? So we still use Red Inca for those kinds of podcasts, and we still use Wagon Wheel, and we still use CricPix, is partly to make it a lot easier for us as a production. Right, so I can say, oh no, we're doing this idea as a footmarks, which is another one, Sam, and we're doing this as Good Areas, and so everyone knows what I mean by that, right? I'd probably say footmarks and Good Areas main channel if I was doing that, and the same with the audience, right? There are heaps of people who don't like CricPix. There are quite a few people who never got into Red Inca. There are lots of people who won't listen to Wag Wheel, and vice versa, right? And so having those names and having them have, I think, even if it's subliminally, I think you can, in your mind, you can understand what the show is, and then you can put it together. By the way, when I came up with some of those names, there's a guy on Twitter who just told me they were all the worst names of all time. Like Good Areas is the only one. Oh, and CricPix, but Red Inca and Wagon Wheel, he just absolutely hated. And I was like, I think you're overestimating. Like, there's a band who's really famous called the Beatles, and they spelt Beatles with B-E-A-T. And it's a stupid name. There's a great joke about it on The Simpsons that gets less funny every time you hear it. After a while, it doesn't really matter what you call the thing. Like the Locked On Network, in the podcasting network, which is something I looked at. I was like, but the guy who runs it is just called David Locke. Ellie says, strange but somewhat relevant. Hypothetical. What would happen if, say, one of the IPL owners fell out of favor with the BJP and gets jailed or exiled? And this oligarch owns the 100, SA20, and MLC teams as well. Would the BCCI still be powerful enough to go against the IPL owners and take their team away? Right now, yes. I think they could do that. They could certainly make it very hard. And I'm basing that on Vijay Mallya, right? In 5 to 10 years, probably not, Ali, would be my guess. I'd have to go through the full ownership agreements and everything as well, because, you know, there's the famous one in the NFL with moral clauses and everything. But yeah, I think right at the moment, it could still happen. It might be, and it depends on who the owners are, but there is a chance in the future that it would be, I just think it'll get harder and harder to do that. Bloody says, when was the first ever Legends League retired players cricket match? Hard to imagine 1980s crowds watching 50-year-old Colin Cowdrey and Gary Sobers playing a tournament. I mean, some of those guys were like still playing when they were old. So did Gary Sobers... Yeah. So actual Legends League is interesting. The first one that I'm aware of is the Beach Cricket League, where I'm pretty sure people were retired when they were playing in the Beach Cricket League. And that was, what, Australian, New Zealand players? I can't remember if there was any South African players, but I remember it being Australian players, and I think there were some Kiwis playing in that one. Then, of course, you have the Warne Tendulkar thing. But I think there's something between the Beach Cricket and the Warne and Tendulkar one. I've got a feeling that it has happened. It certainly has happened going back, though, bloody, before the 1980s. There have been, like, you got to remember, in the 1800s, everything has happened, right? Like, almost everything that's happening today happened in the 1800s, because there was no ICC, there was no ECB or TCCB or anything, right? There wasn't even county cricket for a lot of that time. So you had a lot of random stuff. So I'm pretty sure there were old cricket leagues for older players in that period. Some of them just kept playing at the major league as well. But I think there was veterans cricket in the 1800s, or a version of it. And I think there have been one-off games certainly played before the 1980s. So I think it's been around for a little while. But it's probably, again, it's probably got big on the back of America, hasn't it, would be my guess, where, you know, and maybe is tennis the first one to really profitize? Oh, yeah, tennis and golf as well. I would have assumed. James says, do you have any thoughts about Gus Atkinson's drop in pace? How much of an issue is it? Will it return after some rest? Yeah, it's just injury related. He's probably hurt and he's lost his rhythm and it hasn't quite come back. The problem for Gus Atkinson is, and we're seeing this with Amrit Nokia, who's a lot quicker than Gus Atkinson. If you don't do a lot with the ball and you drop your pace, there's kind of nothing left you can do. Whereas Jofra Archer hasn't always been as quick as he used to be, but he has multiple. He can get lateral movement, right, and he gets weird bounce. Atkinson is more like a poor man's Nokia in that he's almost gun barrel straight, little bits of movement. He's not an overly skillful bowler. He just runs in, bowls from that angle in towards the stumps, and when he does it quickly, he's hard to handle. If he's not doing it quickly, it's a problem. But yeah, I do expect him to get his pace back. Mob King says, you are now Will O'Rourke's manager. It's about fucking time. And set about devising what you hope will become the most punishing strike bowler of modern times. What strategies do you take to maximize strike bowling arsenal and ultimately his career returns? I think what I want from... I think what you want, if you want to build the perfect strike bowler, and especially if you've got someone who bowls roughly 90 miles an hour, who's tall, right? I think what you really want for them is length is the key, right? So with someone like Cameron Green, you just want him to bowl one length over and over again for the rest of his life and never worry about it, right? No one will ever hit him off. If he finds that right length, he'll be absolutely perfect. Whereas I think with someone like Will O'Rourke, what you basically want him to do is you almost, if it was me, I would get him to be trained by, I'll think of all the guys, but I'd get him to be trained by Neil Wagner about angles of fields, angles of bounces. I want his bouncer to be killer like Neil Wagner. You probably some time with Steve Harmison. Steve Harmison's probably a bit faster, like comparatively for his era. But again, Steve Harmison has a very similar natural length to someone like Will O'Rourke. I then want him to probably speak to someone like Kyle Jamieson. There really are, about how to pitch the ball up and swing it when needed, right? So you can hit, so you can use that as on the days when you need to. And then finally, and I don't know who you would get for the last one, but I'd be looking at tall bowlers with good Yorkers. Because essentially what I want with a strike bowler is I want 4 different lengths because different wickets require different things. And it's very unlikely for you to be Waqar Younis, right? Or Muhammad Shami, where you only really need one. I think you need everything to be a strike bowler in modern cricket. And so that's what I would want with Will O'Rourke. And I want him to know why he was using each length and then perfect them as best as he could. So that in any conditions, in any situation, he's a wicket-taking bowler. Sandip says, will you be covering the IPL games or previews, reviews? I've got to talk to Muku. We haven't quite come up with a plan yet. But yes, more or less, we'll on the main channel, we'll be having a couple of videos. We've got bunches of podcasts. We might be doing some different things that we haven't done before on the live channel. I'm not specifically sponsored for the IPL at the moment. And if I'm not sponsored from a business point of view, I can't really afford to pull all of our resources into it. We don't make much money off the IPL. We're probably the only cricket channel that, I wouldn't say our views go down, but they don't really go up. And we don't make more money during the IPL than we do everything else, which is hilarious because everyone's like, oh, you're pandering to India. It's like, if we're pandering to India, we do a video every day. We're not that interested, right? I want to cover the IPL in a completely different way. And if I had a proper sponsor, that's what I would do. I really want to cover it in the way that NBA writers or baseball writers cover stuff, as in, rather than making match reports and everything else, you know what's happened in the game. I really want to do sort of like a live responsive analysis thing. If I had a sponsor, that's what we would look at doing. And we've done little bits of that before, but certainly not anything on a daily basis. Or I don't think, I can't remember. Maybe when we had a sponsor way back when, we might have done something like that. But I don't remember doing anything like that. But yeah, so the main channel at the moment will be probably 2 videos a week, which is normal. And we might throw in the power list as our 3rd video. And then on the rest of the network, on the live network, I should say, we're working on some stuff. I don't know if we'll do scoreboard. I'm not sure if scoreboard actually works particularly well. but I was thinking of doing something a little bit more casual. I've just watched this game, I've got some thoughts, and sort of going, here are the 3 stories or the 3 things that are most interesting to me. I'll be doing some work at Cricket 8 as well. So I will be around. We'll be doing some live watch alongs there. I know someone has already asked a question in the YouTube about that. We will be doing probably maybe slightly less than the live watch alongs last year, or it might even be almost exactly the same amount. MF Jim says, I like your takes on politics and sports. What do you think of gambling companies and their sports washing? Sportsbet in Australia are well known for their social media and advertising and have integrated themselves fully into AFL and NRL. Look, we haven't really taken sports betting money here. My 11 Circle, I can't remember if there's anyone else. And part of the reason is, if you want me to do it, you have to pay me a lot of money. So, you know, One Win came recently and I asked for a lot of money and they didn't want to be involved. And I had some conversations with others. I don't think I'll be able to continue this network without gambling money at the level that I want to continue it, right? Unless we get really, really big or the entire industry changes. So I think at a certain point it's going to happen. My problem with sports betting on live sporting events, I think it's very different than Cricinfo having sponsors, than TalkSport having sponsors, than me having sponsors. And the reason is that the vast majority of the material that you're talking about in those places is aimed at adults, right? Like you go to Cricinfo, it's not aimed at 14-year-old kids. I'm not saying 14-year-old kids don't do it, but it's not aimed at 14-year-old kids. Whereas a lot of live cricket, especially T20 cricket, is aimed at younger audiences. Like, you know, you look at the 100, for instance, you look at the Big Bash, they are specifically aimed at younger audiences. And to me, it doesn't really matter what it is. It used to be smoking. Someone put this up in our Discord today. I think it was PJ. It used to be smoking, throw alcohol in there, fast food, right? We're normalizing things that we know are not particularly good for people through sport. So it is, as you say, MF Jim, sports washing. I'm obviously very different than a lot of other people within cricket. When it comes to gambling, I do gamble. I talk about it openly. You know, with Cricket 8, we talk about gambling a lot. Like that's part of the whole raison d'etre of Cricket 8 is to talk about gambling. That to me is very, very different from a 12-year-old kid watching the cricket with his parents and seeing beer ads and gambling ads. I know realistically that children are going to find alcohol and gambling in most societies fairly easily anyway. And I don't believe in making cigarettes or gambling or fast food or alcohol illegal, because people are going to find that stuff, and like that prohibition doesn't work. But I also don't think that we have to naturally do this. So if you look at it, and in fact, if you look at what we've been doing over the last couple of years of sport, we went cigarettes, we went alcohol, we went fast food. You can throw crypto in there and gambling as well. We just get the things that are the dodgiest are the things that kind of fund sport at a certain level. Not as much as the streaming does, maybe, not as much as the TV rights, but I would say that gambling is the 3rd biggest income. Gambling sites and gambling partnerships is probably the 3rd biggest income that most major sports have now. And I don't know what the long-term... Look, I grew up in a culture where everyone bet, and it was a normal thing, and it was public, and we talked about it. Not all cultures do that, and yet, you know, I watch a lot of cricket streams from, you know, Bangladesh and Pakistan and India, and it's normalizing something that maybe isn't as normal in some parts of society for people. That is weird, right? But at the same time, as I said, we have this progression of every couple of years, sport finds a new wad of money from something that is maybe not morally great. That's not going to stop. That's how advertising works, right? You know, we've all seen Mad Men. There's a whole subplot of Mad Men about what they have to do when cigarette advertising changes and they can't talk about doctors anymore. We've been doing this since advertising existed, right? since Coca-Cola put cocaine in their product, right? Like we've always been doing this. But I do understand the issues with that. But it's sadly it's just not going to go away. When it's not gambling, it will be a different version of crypto, right? When it's not crypto, it will be, I don't know, the next thing. It's, you know, don't want to get too deep into it, but you know, it's not going to stop. Sandeep says, with the buzz around nation-based franchises in the Saturday Grand Slam, and possibility of just 8 teams, which existing cricket nations like Sri Lanka and the West Indies are at risk of not being included, considering the already packed schedule? It could be lots, Sandeep, because it is very possible that there are 2 teams in India. I think New Zealand and West Indies are the 2 that would miss out on those because of time zone, would be my guess. But there might still be one in America anyway, just because it's America. So maybe you can kind of link that up with the West Indies. Although in a 2-week tournament, that's a lot harder. But yeah, I would think that those are the nations that are at most, that have the most issues. I think Sri Lanka is a great place to play a league like this. Because if they're doing it the way that I think they're doing it, you kind of try and make the way that the CPL became like a mini travel type of thing. You would travel out there. I think you could do a similar thing with Sri Lanka as well. Ayush says, why has England declined so much in white ball cricket since 2022? Your top 30 cricketers of all time, rank in order. I'm not sure we'll be able to do that, Ayush. I don't even have that list. I wouldn't even know what it is. It's what, probably Bradman, Imran, Sobers, maybe is my top 3. But then if you're doing all formats, it gets a little bit more mushy. Why has England declined so much? I think England I don't think the next generation of England players were as well-rounded as the ones beforehand. I think it's very similar to the West Indies decline. It's for different reasons, but I've been saying for a while that I thought the young England batters came through were basically throwdown merchants. They're really good against right-arm seam and bowling machines, right? The minute they get out in the world, Tom Banton is the best example of this. Just the minute he got out in the world, I was like, this guy is not going to make runs until he develops his game. And he's slowly doing that as he's reaching, you know, sort of prime batting age, right? And I think he's a much better player now. I'm a big fan of Tom Banton. But they have been producing a lot of these one-dimensional hitters for a while. Their great teams were not one-dimensional hitters. They just weren't. Rob says, do you have any news on Major League Cricket Season 3? Living near Seattle, I'm surprised to hear that both seasons were touch and go because there's not much coverage here. I haven't heard anything. I was in America. I certainly didn't hear anything negative about it. And I think I was hanging out with the USA CEO and the head of Willow. I think one of them might have mentioned it if that was the case. Or there would have been a conversation that might have. I haven't talked to Justin, who runs the league. They've got a new CEO, don't they? Johnny Graves. I haven't talked to him either. Oh, no, but I can tell you the first season went about as close to collapsing as is possible, I think is the best way of putting it. 2 or 3 weeks beforehand, I think everyone running Major League Cricket thought it would not go ahead. PJ says, who would have been your dream Art of Batting book interviews, both dead or alive, and what type of questions would you have asked them? Trumper, Crow, Viv. I really wanted to talk to Chandrapal, and I had his number. He just never got back to me. Hobbs, Grace, Ranji. I think those are probably the ones. I really wanted to talk to Kane Williamson, and we tried to organize it, but he was just too busy every time I tried to do it. So I would have loved to have talked to Kane, because I didn't end up talking to a Fab Four guy, did I? Smith, Root. Yeah, so I didn't talk to a Fab Four guy. So any of the Fab Four would have been great. And Yunus Khan and Kane Williamson, they were the 2 that had said yes, but it just didn't work out. Yunus wanted to talk face-to-face. He was in Birmingham for one of the Legends Leagues, I think, and I just couldn't get up there at that time. And as I said with Kane, he was just a bit too busy. So yeah, I think those 2 are definitely and Chandrapal and Viv. So those are the guys who are alive, right? Yeah. I mean, Steve Smith is so high, would be so high on that list as well. But yeah, of the guys who would had passed on, Martin Crowe, just because I just know, like Raul Dravid, I would have got 2 or 3 hours out Martin Crowe, right? And it would have been gold, and it would have been, exactly what I wanted. Trumper, I just want to know how it happened, how his batting happened. The same kind of with Viv, and then with Grace, and Ranji, I just want the stories a little bit more purely told, if that makes sense. Josh says, how should New Zealand best prepare for the 2026 4-test series in Australia? I just think Australia is so hard to prepare for in general. If you want the real answer here, Josh, it's sending over an A team who's not an A team, right? Who's got like 6 players who you want to play in that series, another couple you might want in the squad. That's the best way of doing it realistically. But if you look at O'Rourke and Jameson, they're pretty well set up, and Henry as well. They're pretty well set up if they don't have injuries. Unfortunately for New Zealand, we know they will have injuries, or someone will lose form because they're going to Australia, and that's what happens. Despite a person says, despite an auction system and a hard salary cap, 3 teams dominate the championships. I'm assuming he means IPL here. Is that what he means? Yeah. What's going on, Mr. Arias? It's not a hard salary cap. There are no major players in the IPL who are not paid extra than what you see on the tin. Go back to a couple of years ago and have a look at Kieran Pollard's wage from Mumbai. My ass, he was getting paid that much. My ass. And I know Kieran Pollard. This is not that Kieran Pollard told me this. This is me just looking at the system going, there's no way. He would have got double that from any other team, right? So the salary cap is a joke. Auction system does work well. Not the way I would do it, obviously, and I've talked about that a lot, but not the way I would do it. But auction system does work, I think, for helping. The problem is that a lot of the teams are dumb as dog shit, right? Like Sam Curran's wage. What? You don't need to pay Sam Curran that much money. He's not a season changer. He's a cherry on top of a really good side, Sam Curran. So there's been a lot of mistakes from a lot of very poorly run franchises, which is a big issue. Then also I would say things like trading. Like Mumbai is probably the one team you would say here. Mumbai has just rinsed teams, right? They've given up no assets to take players who have gone on to win them titles, right? Trent Bolt was traded for a pack of chewing gum. What are we doing? And the fourth thing, I suppose, but this does go back to the second point a little bit of being smarter. I do think that Chennai specifically, and probably Kolkata, worked out that there are key things that they could keep doing consistently, whether it be pitch related, which they both do, but also personnel related, that they can continue to do, which really helps. But a lot of those other teams, and I've only worked for RCB, but I've had brief dealings with Delhi at times, some other conversations with other teams. They're not run well. I think I've said this before, but I've now forgotten his name. But the guy who runs KKR, when he was in the CPL, we were on a group chat with all the different owners and general managers and everything. And his questions were so incisive and so intelligent. And like I could tell why he was asking each question. And I was just like, I get why KKR is successful. And I've met other people in IPL, and I'm like, oh, I get why you're not successful. Ali says, thoughts on the Grand Slam Saudi League could enhance or compete with various other leagues? We don't know because we don't really know what it is. My guess is if they're doing it in hand, at least at the moment with the Big Bash, it's not going to clash with the Big Bash, right? It's going to clash with several other leagues around the world, with the idea from the Players Union of maybe just killing some of those leagues off so that you have a better structure where everyone is playing. You might have players who play in like 6 leagues a year or 4 leagues a year, but maybe for the same owners over and over again, or they have job security, or they're getting paid on time. But yeah, my guess is some leagues will either die off or Georgie Pie Super Smash or whatever they call themselves, right? I just realized I did a podcast the other day and I said Super Smash for South Africa and I meant Ram Slam, didn't I? Anyway, that just came into my head. But yeah, so I think that's actually the point of this league, is to kill some of those other leagues off, or just render them so neutral that international players don't really want to be involved in them anymore. Or at least the top 400 international players don't want to be involved with them anymore. Sandeep says, please talk anything you can about your future or currently in planning endeavors with good areas and outside. It's really hard. I don't know what the future is right at the moment, Sandeep. I've been talking to investors about a more global version of good areas, which is what 99.94 was. So, potentially running 12 to 16 shows rather than what do we run now? I suppose one pre-made one and one live one, which is an idea that I had through 99.94. It's kind of been distilled and changed a little bit, but it's still basically the same thing. So talking to a couple of investment groups about that at the moment, and I've had some really positive discussions. We're looking at probably that sort of a business. We're looking at probably a $3 million investment over 3 years, and we think we can pull it off. It might be 4 million over, it might be slightly higher, but that's roughly what we're looking at the moment. So that's the pie in the sky idea. On a more normal level, it's really just trying to make sure the good areas makes a profit. It hasn't been a profitable thing. It pays itself, but it doesn't really make a profit, which means that if there is a downturn so we had a downturn in podcast advertising just because the people stopped advertising as much in podcasts. And that, probably took away 20% of our overall profit, right? We're so diversified in the way that we get money that it's not always the end of the world when something like that happens, but it's really, really tough. We've had some discussions with some really big companies about coming on board, and one company has told us that they want to sponsor us, but it hasn't happened. So we're hand to mouth. And if we're still hand to mouth in this network in 6 months, I think we probably will have to think about making some changes in the network. But we have got a brand new studio with Wi-Fi that works today. In that studio, we have 4 different places to record, which means that, I could probably get Andy Zoltzman, who lives around the corner, if I can get a sponsor, or even I might get him on a project about the book anyway, to come in and we can record next to each other and we can do our own, we can do our own stuff all together. We'll have a green screen. We've obviously got the blackboard videos. We'll be doing more stuff with my son. We'll be putting a cricket net outside. So good areas will continue, but in what way and what shape, I don't know. But I just want to tell cricket stories. So that is whether I get massive amounts of investment or not, that's essentially what we're trying to do. Neil says, do you miss being able to go to games as much as you used to? Might you start going again, or does your current setup work better given the volume of cricket on? It's much better for my life. I really didn't see my boys grow up all that much, and I see my daughter, I went to Boston and my daughter really handled it poorly because I've been her main carer, right? For certainly since my wife went back from maternity. I've been my daughter's main carer the vast majority of the time. And so I have a different bond with my daughter than I even have with my boys. Not that I have a bad relationship with my boys at all, but it's just different. When my boys are like, oh, you're going to Boston, fine. You're always away, right? They are much more used to it. I think this summer I'm doing a lot of touring in England. I could have gone to India, Australia. I pulled out because I wasn't quite going to work for me. This summer, I assume I'm going to go to 6 or 7 test matches in the UK. I might, if the business is going well, I can afford to fly out to Australia and do a couple of Ashes tests. I'd like to start going to ICC events. Someone from the ICC reached out and goes, why are you not here? You should be at the Champions Trophy. I would have loved to have been at the Champions Trophy, right? But I've got to, the way my business is. But there's 2 reasons I want to be at the grounds. I pick up more things at the grounds. And the other one is I've just been out of the loop for a while as far as contacts and everything. A lot of the people who are great contacts for me have moved on, right? They no longer work in the business. And, there are people now that I've only ever met via direct messages or WhatsApps or whatever that I would love to be able to go up to and just chat. You know, like lots of very famous people have sent me very nice messages about stuff we've done here. But I've never met these people, right? Whereas in the old days, they'd come up in the lunch queue, tap me on the shoulder. You know, so I can't remember when it was, but India-England series or one test match or whatever it was a couple of years ago, Dinesh Karthik just comes up and goes, I really like your videos. You know, let's have a chat. I don't get that anymore. So that I really need to do. But I do think I'll never travel the way that I used to. That 200 to 220 days a year, I don't want to do that anymore, but also don't think it works for this business. Bloody says, in England and Australia, it took until the 60s for players to be professional. But how long did it take for all staff at the board to be paid professionals? In England, at least, I assume the selectors were amateur gentlemen for much longer. The selectors only just got paid recently, didn't they? Merv Hughes was an unpaid selector. I mean, he might have got a per diem. They did get stipends and per diems for Australia. And Merv Hughes was what, 2012-ish, 2013? Australia started playing the selectors in 2014, 2015. Australian players weren't professional until the 90s, by the way, really. Outside of a little bit of Kerry Parker. England cricketers had been professional for a long time, but not all of them, which is obviously a completely different conversation. But yeah, there are still selectors around the world who are not paid for national bodies. So that's kind of been the last hold-off position. Why you want to pay everyone in your lineup, in your entire stable of 2 or 3 or 400 or 2,000 or 3,000 staff, but not the people who pick the talent for you to win your games, has always... I mean, I've had arguments with selectors who are happily unpaid and just being like, no, ridiculous. Of course you should be paid. And chairman is another one. The chairs. I don't think all the chairs are paid. Again, should be paid. So certainly, there are still people around in top-level cricket who are not paid to this day, would be my guess. Ruja says, India's not managed to win a test series in England. Technically, 2021 doesn't count. Okay. Since 2007, what are India's realistic expectations this year? They've had a rough... I mean, if they've got Bumrah and Shami, then, you know, they should be very good. If they don't, then they're going to struggle. I think we've seen now that their third and fourth best seamers are a step behind. But if they had Bumrah and Shami, I can see them winning. They really should have won in 2021, right? Like, whatever. But I kind of, in my head, I kind of mark that as a victory. They played 2 different England sides. But yeah, if you technically want to say they haven't won, I think they have a big chance. Again, batting is much more of a concern to me, but bowling fitness is probably what will dominate it. Josh says, when Virat eventually retires, will his media obsession successor be as constantly talked about as he was? Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think that's just where we are now. Let's say it's Jaiswal. That's just going to be how we deal with sport now. I think that's fair. You might get little peaks, like Shane Warne was probably still talked about more than other Australian cricketers. But as a general rule, there's more media, there's more discussion. You know, there are Australian captains that are not particularly famous. There are New Zealand captains who are not particularly famous. But we see the faces of modern New Zealand captains and Australian captains a lot more, right? Like, so in every different, whether it's India or anywhere else, it's the same thing. There's more exposure. MF Jim says, after all the Saudis men follow the money piece, I was surprised that the ACA was very on board given the known views of this cohort particularly. Is the money big enough to sway ethics? I don't think it is at the moment, MF Jim. That's the thing I don't understand. I could say this, I think. I don't think Neil Maxwell will be upset. I was contacted by a company who wanted to sponsor good areas and wanted to be involved in cricket. And they were trying to do environmentally friendly tourism like competitions. You know, I think some people know, I don't know if these are everywhere in the world, but like I know they're in America. I think they're in the UK. They're probably in other parts of the West. But I don't know if they're in Asia or South or in Africa or anything. But essentially, you buy a lottery ticket to like get a house, and then they give away their house. And then over time, that has kind of changed to you buy a lottery ticket to do something else, like, I don't know, hang out with Tom Brady, or, go skiing with a rock star or whatever. And there was an environmentally friendly version of that I think they'd heard me on some channel when the whole environmental, when the protest happened at Lord's. And I was obviously very pro the environment. I think there should be more environment. And so they got in touch with me and said, look, we're trying to do this thing. It would mean that, Pat Cummins maybe once a year would send out a bunch of tweets, and then he would go for, 3 or 4 days to help the environment in some place, but take a crew of other people who'd won. It was something like that. I might have got the details wrong because it was during the Ashes, but that's how I remember it. And I offered it to Neil Maxwell, and Neil Maxwell was like, that's great. That's exactly the sort of thing that Pat would want to get involved with. And I left it there. They didn't end up sponsoring me. It was a startup. It might have fallen apart. I don't even know if it ended up going through. But, that was the sort of thing that they wanted Pat Cummins to be associated with then, right? Like, for them, the ability for him to make a little bit money, but also help the world was a big part of it. I don't know what Pat Cummins' feelings are, but it is interesting that his manager is currently on the other side of it. But Michael Holding said this to me, I don't know, 14 years ago, whenever it was, when we were doing Death of a Gentleman. Players will go where the money is. They don't have long careers. They don't get the opportunities a lot of time to make ethical decisions. We've seen them. Not everyone went with Kerry Packer, right? Not everyone took the ICL money back in the day, right? Not everyone wants to play T20 cricket if they don't like T20 cricket. We have seen ethical decisions be made before by players, and they happen all the time. But the vast majority of players know that they have an 8-year peak earning opportunity if they're lucky. And this is, for a lot of players around the world, potentially life-changing money if the Saudis come in. We have to remember that, while also applauding the people who make decisions that aren't based on that. But if you're a South African player and you are offered a $30 million contract to go play in Saudi Arabia, that is generational wealth in South Africa, right? Generational. I forget his name, but the South African all-rounder who got paid an absolute fortune for Rajasthan Royals in the first year and played like 2 games. He literally went back to South Africa with his, whatever it was, $600,000 for playing in the IPL, and just retired. It's not even a lot of money compared to what the modern cricketers are making, right? But he could do that. And so we are now talking about vast sums, and we have to understand that. I remember, I can't remember whose book it was now, but it was the Australian writer it was Ashley Gray, I want to say that's his name, who wrote the book about the West Indian players who went to play in apartheid South Africa. And I think a lot of us kind of were like, how could they not know? And then you hear the stories of these guys, and like, some of them just had no political knowledge, or it just wasn't part of their life. They didn't know. They knew what the word apartheid was in some cases, but I think there were some players who didn't even know what the word apartheid meant, right? And most players, when I've talked to, are not particularly politically savvy. They're just not. That's not what they're good at. They're good at hitting cricket balls or bowling them. PJ says, after your recent Boston trip and quick stops to Fenway and the Garden, is there anything both realistically and unrealistically that you'd like to see cricket take from American sports, especially in terms of marketing, promotions? So there was something at the Garden that I just thought was so stupidly simple. You know when you get takeaway containers at cricket events around the world, they come in like the logo of the company, right? So, I don't know, so-and-so's food providers. And at the Garden, it was a Celtics container. I've taken a video of it. We're going to be doing something on it. And that was the thing I noticed about both of those places. They don't miss a chance to market the thing. If you go, Lord's is quite good at this. The MCG is good, but remember, it's not just a cricket ground. But you go to the vast majority of cricket grounds in the world, don't really market the cricket team, whether it be the domestic team or the international team, on any level. within the stadium. You're just in a stadium that happens to have the South African team playing or the Highveld Lions playing or whoever it is, right? And it's everywhere. And there's so many obvious missed opportunities for it to feel like the Knots ground, right? And I think Knots is actually slightly better than some of the others, and they do some cool things. But there's a lot of it where I'm like, it's just really obvious that we're missing open goals that don't really cost anything, right? And that would be probably the main one. The other one is I got into the Garden in about 40 seconds through security. If there's a cricket ground I've ever been into in 40 seconds, it's because I went through a dodgy back door and no one was not noticing, right? In fact, the only time I reckon I got into a ground really easy was Centurion, when I did actually, I must have just accidentally slipped in through a side door while no one was watching. I didn't mean to, but I realized that I'd walked all the way into the ground, into the press box without showing my badge. So in that case, it was bad security. It was just so easy to get in. All right, let's just take a very quick break and then we'll come back with the super chats. I am Jarrod Kimber and this is is it yours? That's someone's, isn't it? Wagon Wheel. From Virat Kohli's MCG 6 against Pakistan to Bumrah's stump-destroying Yorker to Ollie Pope. Incredible things happen on the cricket ground. We also get iconic lines off it, like Siraj saying, "I only believe in Jassie Bye." There are so many incredible moments that cricket fans just never forget. And now you can wear them on your chest. Free Hit Gear has launched a line of amazing t-shirts and hoodie designs. Passionate fans in India can order through their website, freehitgear.com, while fans abroad can use Free Hit Gear on the Etsy store to have items delivered to them. Order now with the code. All right, welcome back. Let's get through these super chats. He says, and then he's lost them. Venki Mysore. I saw that very quickly come up. Yes, Venki Mysore was the person I was talking about before. I was so impressed by him. I don't think I've met him, but I was on about 3 or 4 group calls with him. ABCD says, is it a flaw that adjusted ODI numbers had multiple bowlers with economy around 4.2, but no one has an economy below 4.6 in the last 15 years? Probably a better question for Varun. I think there might be bowlers with a very adjusted economy of around that, but I think there were actually more outlier bowlers back in the old days than there are now. But yeah, oh, there we go. So Varun's saying the same thing. I think it was, if you look at some of the old bowlers and their economies, they're ridiculous. So my guess is that it was much. I think there are more teams who would block out a bowler in the olden days. Even Bumrah and Rashid Khan don't really get blocked out in the same way. So I think that might be a part of it. Foxer1 says, Afridi's the only Pakistan player that has a career strike rate at 150 in the top 40. The next best is Shadab, and he is crapped on. Yeah, I mean, Shadab Khan's problem is that essentially that he, at one stage, looked like he was going to be the next White Knight of the team, right? Like, he can bat, he can bowl, he can field, and then his bowling fell apart. I think if you've ever been on my channel, you know how highly I rated him, especially at his best, but even now. But he physically can't do some of the cricket. But yeah, I think he's a fantastic player. He definitely doesn't deserve the credit he gets. But that's the Shane Watson effect, right? Sometimes you can't live up to the unrealistic. Sometimes you can't live up to the unrealistic ideals that other people have for you. Ayan says, big fan, thank you. Similar to your art of batting, I tried the 5 best test paces ever. Marshall, McGrath, Hadley, Steen, Ambrose. Your top 5? I don't really have a top 5 yet. I just haven't got to this conversation. I don't know if I'd have Ambrose. And I'm like, he's my favorite of those guys, by the way. I like Marshall. I like McGrath. I'm pretty sure I'm happy with Hadley, but I'd have to do a lot more. But that's a solid top 5. I would have Garner over Ambrose. Yeah, I think that's right. Indigo says, how does Jimmy Butler have a greater impact on all the teams he's played than his numbers suggest? I think it's such a weird basketball question, but we have these players in cricket as well. And it's one thing that I think coaches will fight back against when it comes to analysts, and I think they're right to do it, is there are certain players who by their role elevate other players. So for instance, someone like, I want to say David Visa, but I'm not sure he's perfect. But David Visa is a really good example of this. Actually, Dwayne Bravo. Dwayne Bravo is a perfect example. I think Dwayne Bravo's death bowling is overhyped. And I think his batting was really, really good, but he was never quite a specialist batter. And he was a brilliant fielder, right? He might have been a better fielder than anything else in everything that he did. But Dwayne Bravo, because even though his numbers don't always look good, his overall impact on a game is so high because you have a fifth bowler who can do a top four bowler's job, death bowling, right? You have a guy who can bat at 6 and 7. So let's say he can bat at 6 at his best back in his heyday. So he can bat in a specialist position if needed, but he's still giving you extra bowling. And then out in the field, you have a gun fielder, right? So and I'm just making this up, but let's say you had Dwayne Bravo for 12 games. He goes at 9 runs and over. He averages about 24 runs per wicket. He averages 18, let's give him slightly more, 22 with the bat at a strike rate of 145, right? There's some good stuff in those numbers, but I don't think they pop out. I don't think he's going to make like an MVP level season or anything like that, right? But when you actually start to work out, well, now you can be more flexible with your bowling because you have an all-rounder who fills in for a specialist position, which means that you might be able to pick another all-rounder, or you might be able to use a younger bowler who is a specialist in one key thing. You might be able to use a young, up-and-coming frontline bowler, opening bowler in that situation. So Dwayne Bravo's effect on that side is already bigger than his numbers through one selection decision. And you can do the same with the batting. You know, we had Dwayne Bravo at Melbourne Stars, and it gave us flexibility with our lineup, right? That you wouldn't normally get because we could bat him at number 6 when we needed to. We could also bat him at number 8, right? We could play him as a specialist death bowler and have him at number 8 and Liam Plunkett at number 9. And suddenly we've got this really long batting lineup. Like, it gave us incredible flexibility in both directions. So I think Jimmy Butler is a very similar kind of player to that. Jimmy Butler can handle the ball. He can pass the ball. He can do a little bit of shooting. He can get to the ring. He can post people up. And he can defend pretty much positions 1 through to 4. And he can probably defend centers on occasion as well. I mean, he has defended that. So the flexibility in the lineup that Jimmy Butler gives you is huge. Do you want him to be the point guard? Yeah, he can do point guard for 15 minutes a night if you have to. Do you want him to abuse smaller guards? Yeah, he's stronger and taller than most guards, right? Do you want him to defend the opposition's best ball handler? Yes, he can do that. Do you want him to sit out on the wing and be a help side defender? Yes, he can do that. So it's not just about numbers, it's about role. And we see that in cricket and in basketball. And he says, other likes of Bumrah, Varun and Kuldeep, anomalous, despite India's talent glut. Feel like they're great as their lateral thinkers our system can't produce. I have always believed that if you get everyone in a society playing cricket, and I think this is one of cricket's biggest problems, you will naturally have better thinkers and more outside the box style of cricket. If you get a bloke off the beach like Jeff Thompson, if you get a guy from the country like Don Bradman, if you allow a player like Steve Smith, so the higher, the more cricketers, the more outliers you should find, which is why I'm a big fan of spreading cricket everywhere, right? So I think that there are a lot of Australian and Indian and English and South African cricketers who are like textbook copycutter. That's how they are taught, and they are always going to be your bread and butter. But as cricket grows in your society and more people come to it with more diverse backgrounds, you should have more outliers as well. Siladitya? I think that's what it says. You've talked about Chakravarti being the best white ball spinner. I feel he's also in contention for being the worst fielder in the world. Oh, is he the worst fielder in the world? Mujib might be upset at that. I think him and Kuldeep, I think, affects him. Look, the truth is, to go back to the Jimmy Butler point that someone just brought out a moment ago, and the Dwayne Bravo thing. Coaches want you to be 3 format players or 3 tool players, right? They want someone who can help in the field. They want someone who can help with the bat. They want someone who can help with the ball. That's what coaches want, right? Coaches love that because a player like Varun is such a joy to have, but you have to fit him into your lineup. So I do think at times that he won't play as much cricket because of that. I think that's a very fair way of looking at it. Thank you for the super chat. Shrikant says, can we push Saudi money to fund a new Red Bull league with test status? I think that's already part of it, Shrikant. If you have a look, I've already talked about this. I do think this is part of it. I think there might, I think part of the plan, and I haven't talked to Chris Barrett or Brettig about this, but my guess is that part of the plan is to have a franchise test league. So yeah, I think that will happen. Shrikant says, 5 most influential cricketers of all time. Grace Ranji, Basil D'Oliveira, Sarfraz Jardine. Grace Ranji, Basil D'Oliveira. I'll give all 3 of those. Sarfraz and Jardine, I don't know. Where does Mohammad Asif come into that now? Because reverse swing has about 30 years. Swivel ball's at about 10. Yeah, maybe. I don't think Jardine makes the list, Shrikant, because Bouncers kind of died after that. So I don't think he does. Andy says, what have you thought of Fleming as a coach outside the CSK ecosystem? Is he one of the best T20 coaches, or has he been a benefactor of MSD? This is hard for me to say, Andy, because I've worked with him. I don't think he's ever been able to recreate what he's done at Chennai, which is, it's not just him being a very good coach, which I do believe he is. Like, if he got a job tomorrow and he called me up and wanted me involved, I would seriously consider his option over most people's options, right? Like, I really do rate him very highly. But if you look at CSK, I think it's not just the MSD thing, is it? It's the pitches, it's the whole ownership group committing to a plan, and it's everyone executing that plan. So I think, Andy, in that case, there's a lot of things going on. Maybe Fleming hasn't had the ability to do that. I was with him at the Melbourne Stars, and I thought we were building towards something at the Melbourne Stars, and then he left, Trent left, and I was flicked in that the changeover as well. But I really thought we were building towards something quite cool. I was only there for 1 year. Those guys were there for longer. But yeah, we made the final the 1 year that I was there and should have won the final. Yash says, with Kohli poor record in England as inability to play the ball, how sad is it for a player of his caliber to retire with an average of 45? Is he still in your top 20? I don't think he's in my top 20 in the book, but he's close to my top 20. I'm not interested in his final average in the way that I'm not interested in most players' final averages, Yash. There are lots of players who will end with a much higher average than him that are not the player that Virat Kohli is. There are lots of players with a lower average than Virat Kohli who still are very high up in my book, right? And some of them are guys who played when they were a little bit too young and then also played when they were a little bit too old. But for Virat Kohli, for me, he's a peak batter. And what he did in his peak is one of the greatest peaks our sport has ever had. The game changed around him. But he has conquered England. He has conquered Australia. He has conquered South Africa. So he still has things ahead of him that Kane Williamson hasn't really got, right? Like when it comes down to it. So Kane Williamson's going to end with a much higher average. Within that, I still don't think he's a better bat than Virat Kohli. And so that's why average is just one thing, Yash. And in this era, especially, and there's no doubt that Kane has aged better. And maybe if my book comes out in 3 years' time, I might have Kane back ahead of Virat again, right? The same way that Joe Root can move. It's very hard with the current players. What if Virat just has 2 great years and he smashes England everywhere, right? Like, does that make it all go away? Things change is the best way of putting it. Will says, the Saudi takeover mean Durham get the last laugh. I'm assuming that's a Newcastle football joke, Will. And you're not going to be shocked to know that it's completely beyond me. Although I think I've got it together. I think I've understood that that is what the joke is. But I could be wrong. But yes, why not? And then Anarit says, what's your take on India's chances in the test series against England this summer? Considering India's got Bumrah and Shami for only two tests each, and England seem preoccupied with the Ashes. I don't think England's a particularly good side. I think Bumrah and Shami, obviously, their fitness is going to play a huge part. I'm not a massive fan of the England side, though, at all. I think they're a bit of a mess at the moment. I don't think that they can... I don't think that they can do... I don't think Bazball works in the same way that it used to work. So I think there's a few different question marks there. I think India has a good chance of winning. I'm worried about the batting, and I worry about the fact that they're not always going to have their best bowlers available to them. But yeah, I'm not a real believer. I think so. I was not a believer in Gus Atkinson, as people might remember. Bryden Cast is probably someone who is winning me over, but again, I'm not sure I'm a huge believer in him. Potts, I still really like, but it's not a great bowling attack, is it? Like the names I'm saying, it's not. Even if you believe in all those guys, it's not a great bowling attack. So there's plenty of options there for that. Anyway, that is me done for this wagon wheel. Thank you very much to everyone with the super chats. Again, quite a few super chats there. And thank you to everyone else who supports us on Patreon and everyone who put a comment in as well. I saw Sag just put one in at the end, but I know there were so many questions that we don't always get to on here. But big thanks to everyone. And look, the Wi-Fi worked. And not only did it work, it seemed to be almost perfect, which I've never seen anything like before in this studio. So we're still building this studio step by step. We're still building good areas step by step. We're still building.
You want to swing wildly at the internet like you've got the new pill in your hand, but you keep getting dead battered. Find the movement you want with NordVPN. They are our protection against terrifying cyber threats and wide-battered geo-blocks. NordVPN will help you get through any rights restrictions so you can watch all the cricket you want. We aren't always happy the wickets were on. Sometimes we need a change. NordVPN can switch your virtual location so your IP address is ready to cash in. So if you need to get around the internet's rules, or I suppose in our case laws, select NordVPN. They can help you watch a game on a cheaper stream in another country. Give NordVPN the ball and let them penetrate all your vast internet issues. Because if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. You can also receive a 20-gigabyte daily data voucher. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a big hitter is coming for you at nordvpn.com/KIMBER right now.